Good day and welcome to the Critical Focus channel, where we feature everything related to Warhammer Underworlds, Kill Team, Aliens, Cursed City and so much more. Before continuing with this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit the bell button and like and comment the video. So let's delve into the deadly depths of Warhammer Underworlds, and we'll start with the objectives here. So in this rival deck we have 3 searches. We have 8 end phases and 1/3 end phase. So that's a bit weak, but let's not take anything for granted before actually looking at the cards. It might actually be okay. So just let's go over the searches first, I guess. Alright, so first up we have a dual search, Dark Judgment. Scores immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action if the target was taken out of action and the attacker and or the defender was in a cover hex in enemy territory. So the last part definitely makes it a lot harder, but it's still definitely scoreable. We have a similar card for killing someone in cover hex basically. So I mean, this is a twist of that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely scoreable. We've seen way harder cards, search cards in other rivals decks, but we've also seen easier cards. So it's kind of middle of the road, I would say, but it's not horrible in any way, shape or form. Next one is a dual search for 2 glory, Desperate Triumph. Score this immediately after an activation step if your leader is on a featured token in enemy territory and your leader is vulnerable. Kind of weird card. Banking on your leader being vulnerable on a feature token in enemy territory. Such a weird card. You never play for this to happen, and if it happens you're definitely worth your 2 glory. It's not something you ever would take in a championship deck, and if you manage to score it in a rival game, more power to you, but it's not a good card. Alright, so next one is a just plain old search. No dual, no hybrid, it's just a regular search. It's called Searching Darkness. It scores immediately after an activation step if 2 more friendly fights with charged tokens are on feature tokens. It's certainly doable for larger warbands. It's not something you take for 3-man warbands, probably not even 4-man warbands. So it's probably 6 up, and yeah, it's pretty scoreable there. It's kind of slow, but it's definitely decent. Might actually try it out in a championship deck even, but maybe the strongest of the 3 here. I mean, it's a toss-up between the first and the third card here, but yeah, the leader being vulnerable search is definitely the trash card amongst these 3 cards. So this is pretty scoreable. Okay, so moving on with the end phase cards here. We have a duel for 1 glory, a war in the shadows. Scores in an end phase if during the previous activation step 1 or more enemy fighters were taken out of action and 2 more friendly fights are in cover hexes. So the good part, you don't have to kill them with an attack action, but the bad part, you have to take the last activation to score this card. Basically, if you don't have out of sequence, but yeah, you can't do it in a power step. You have to kill them in the activation steps. You can't kill them with a pin card in the power phase. So this is just pretty bad. It will happen sometimes, but banking on taking the last, which you might not want to do, such a weird card, and I don't really like it, sadly. Alright, so next one is also 1 glory duel, Blood in the Deeps. Scores in an end phase if during the previous activation step 1 or more enemy fights were taken out of action, so exactly the same as the last card, and 1 or more friendly fights are within 1 hexes of a feature token. So the second part is easier than the last one. The first part is just the same, so this is just slightly easier, but it's still, yeah, you have to take this last activation in 99% of the cases. So it's just equally weird and equally bad, almost. Alright, so next up is Call of the Dark. Score this in an end phase if 4 or more fighters are each in a cover hex So the good part is it's not just friendly fighters, so it needs to be 4 fighters all over the board. After you score this card, pick one opponent. That opponent's warband deal 1 damage to 1 fighter from your warband. That's in the cover X. And this is 3 glory, that's pretty strong. It might actually be scoreable. Probably 1 opponent will be in the cover X, so you need probably, in most cases, 3 fighters. So I think it's playable for anything with 6 or more fighters. And you probably should have some resurrectable fighters as well to be able to safely pull this off in most cases. So it's good for some warbanded, but it's crap for some other warbands. But it's yeah, it's probably a swarm card, and you might actually take it for championship games as well for certain warbands. So yeah, it's definitely better than the other 2 here. Yes, next up is a duel for 2 glory, crushing them wholesale. I'm not sure that's the right pronunciation, but never mind. Scores in an enemy phase if there are more enemy fighters out of action than there are surviving enemy fighters and 1 or more enemy leaders out of action. So it asks kind of a lot. It's probably about right for 2 glory, and it's definitely scoreable, but versus certain warbands with very strong leaders with a lot of wounds, you're gonna have a hard time, and it's probably a 3rd end phase card in that case. So it's probably not something you take in a championship deck, but it's definitely scoreable as far as pretty hard rival deck cards goes. So yeah, it's okay. Next up we have Duskbringers. It's 1 glory, scores in an end phase if 1 or more friendly fighters are each on a feature token in enemy territory that was an objective token at the start of the round. So you can't score it in the first round because there are no objective tokens at the start of the first round. So I think that's kind of sells it for me as to being a bad card for 1 glory, because I think every end phase card that's just 1 glory should be scoreable in the first phase. Otherwise you could just as well take only 2 glory end phases. And it asks a lot for 1 glory, I think. And you kind of need some flip tech for this to be reliable enough to score, so you don't really want to invest that much in a card that's not worth more than 1 glory, so I don't rate this very highly. Alright, so here we have a Rippa going at it with looting the remains. Scores in an end phase if 1 or more enemy fights are out of action. Scores in an end phase if 1 or more enemy fighters that are out of action each have 2 or more upgrades. 1 glory. I think there are just easier 1 glory cards. So for the purpose of championship decks, I probably wouldn't take it. But it's definitely scoreable in a rival setting. I mean, most cards are pretty hard in a rival deck, usually. But I mean, if you are up against Illusory Might, it's gonna be hard, because there will be no objectives there. So yeah, it really depends on what type of upgrades your opponent brings. And how squishy fighters they bring as well, because they might not just get upgrades to a lot of fighters if they are playing swarms. So it's just a lot easier versus elites. So yeah, that's that, I guess. Next up we have an end phase for 2 glory, Plumbing the Depths. Scores in an end phase if 1 or more friendly fighters are in a cover hex, 1 or more friendly fighters are on a feature token, and 1 or more friendly fighters are in a lethal hex. This at first glance seems like you need to have 3 fighters in different types of hexes, but the fighter in the cover hex can also be the fighter on the feature token when you think about it. And then you need to have 1 second fighter in a lethal hex. And for warbands that take no damage in lethal hexes, unless pushed, something like Thorns of the Briar Queen or Lady Harrows even, should have a really easy time to score this. And for 2 glory, it's almost too good. Yeah, it's a really strong card for certain warbands. and doable for every warband. So really easy to glory. Strong card. Next up we have Purging the Abyss. Score this in an end phase if more enemy fighters were taken out of action in this round than there are objective tokens on the battlefield. Well, that seems doable, certainly. It's stronger than the first couple of cards with the last activation part. It's still not strong enough to take in a competitive championship deck. It is about the power level of most end phases in rival decks though, so it's probably about right, but it's not really a strong card. Versus certain warbands, killing more than one can be a challenge, and controlling that there are no more than one objective can also sometimes be a challenge, so it's not an auto score, but it should be fairly doable. And the last card here is the dual third end phase for 3 glory. There are 2 or more surviving friendly fighters, and each of those friendly fighters is on an objective token in the same territory. I think this is a bit hard, actually. Yeah, it's 3 glory, so it should be decently hard, although in the third end phase I think cards should be slightly easier than this, even if it's for 3 glory. So you first off need to have a fair amount of fighters to be able to score reliably having 2 surviving fighters, and then you need to make sure that you are holding objectives with each of those fighters. So if you have 3 or 4 fighters, each needs to be an objective token. So I think it's a bit of a trap card. I would never take it in a championship deck, and it's probably gonna be a struggle to score it in the rival deck that we have here as well. So I'm kind of dubious here. I'm not too hot for this card. Right, so let's see how the Ploys and upgrades complement these kind of hard objective cards. So first up we have a Hungry Darkness. Pick 1 feature token, push that feature token 1 hex closer to the nearest enemy fighter. And yeah, this card is vital for supplementing that very hard end phase. The end phase cards that need to have 4 fighters on feature tokens. So it can certainly help you there. I mean, generally speaking, outside of this rival deck, it's not one of the strongest pushes. Obviously, Symbiote's Call is better, Heated Instinct is better. I mean, Center of Attention is better. So a lot of stuff is better than this, but a push is a push, and a push is always useful. Next up we have Amphibious Ambush, really cool card art here with Bridget swimming like a mad lady here in the knife in her mouth. The first range 1 attack action made in the next activation step that targets an enemy fighter on a feature token as Cleave and Grievous. So this is a pretty bad accuracy card because it needs you to do range 1. And it gives Cleave and Grievous. So, I mean, I have always said, and I still say, that plus dice is always better than Cleave and stuff like this. Just give me extra dice, and there are so many cards that give extra dice, so this will never end up in a championship deck, and you need to you need to hit someone on a feature token, and it's only for range 1, so it has a lot of caveats. And I mean, in the deck here, it will help score some stuff. It will help both of the cards taking out of action in the last activation and phases, as well as, I mean, kill someone in a cover hex, search, what more? More enemy fighters out of action than surviving, yada yada. So it complements a lot of cards, but it's not a very good accuracy card. Next up is Blazing Light. Choose 1 fighter, so both enemy fighters and friendly fighters are eligible. Flip each feature token that is not an objective token and that is within 2 hexes of the chosen fighter. So this is very good to auto-score Sudden Revelation or even like the ever downwards that need you to flip 3, or the other part with the leader. I might be confusing that card forward now, but so this is a pretty strong card, and yeah, you can always find use for this card, I think, in most decks. Yeah, so this will probably find its way into several championship decks as well, so very strong card. Next up is +1 damage to the first attack action in the next activation step that targets a fighter on a feature token. Yeah, I do think there is a very good case to be made for this card, namely that it does not have a range restriction. So it works for range 3, etc. And most damage boosting cards are only for range 1 and 2, at least universal cards like that. So this is pretty good, and something that you probably will take for range 3 warbands such as Thunderix and like Fast Riders or anything like that. Yeah, so they're pretty decent. I prefer generally accuracy over damage, but the ability to boost range 3 damage is very strong. So next up we have Murderous Tides, which is +1 dice to the first attack action made by a friendly fighter with 1 or more supporting fighters. So it's just a worse version of Determined Effort, but it has the added benefit here in the end. This effect persists until a friendly fighter with 1 or more supporting fighter makes an attack action, or until the end of the round. So if your opponent actually plays a counter, like I know that the Hexbane Hunters has a card that says that dice characteristic can't affect friendly fighters, or so attack actions in the next activation or something of the sort, then you haven't played this card for nothing, at least, unless it's the last activation in the round. So you can still get some mileage out of this card even if such a counter is played, but otherwise in most cases it's just like a more conditional version of a Determined Effort. But accuracy is always useful. Next up here we have Rothgorn taking a snack, Seeking the Deep Truths. Choose 1 friendly fighter in a cover X. Deal 1, 2 or 3 damage to the chosen fighter, then roll X magic dice, where X is the amount of damage you dealt to the chosen fighter. You cannot choose to deal more damage to the chosen fighter than their wound characteristics. On a roll of 1 or more focuses, gain 1 glory point. We have something similar with like Daylight Robbery. Is basically a card that you have a 50-50 chance of gaining glory, but you also have the chance to then steal the glory from your opponent, so you offset the glory balance with 2. And that does not hurt your own fighters, and can really skew the tempo in the game where you mess up your opponent's early glory. But never mind, I don't think this is a good card. It's interesting to play it on the fish, I guess, because your opponent won't gain any glory from you taking your fish away from the board while you have a chance to gain glory, but otherwise it's not really a good card. Alright, so next up we have Shadowed Refuge, +1 defense to friendly fighters in a cover hex in the next activation step. This is pretty good card for the Shadeborn, which most of the time, or a big part of the time, will be in cover hexes, all of them via cards or counters. So that's pretty neat. Otherwise, it's not really super interesting, I guess. But I mean, +1 defense doesn't hurt. It's not situational. You can always find use for it. So yeah, it's okay card. Okay, next up we have The Walls Are Closing In. At the end of the next activation step, deal 1 damage to each fighter in edge checks. So this is a bit telegraphed. The opponent has at least the chance to do something about this via push cards to get away from such edge hexes, and it might hurt your own fighters as well, so it's probably better for swarm warbands that don't really care about getting pinged on small fighters. It could be a decent ping card for something like Wormspat to deal out some ping damage to inspire, but I think there are better choices. I'm not really a huge fan of this. Next up is Waist Deep. Fighters that are not on feature tokens at the start of the next activation step have a move characteristic of 2 in the next activation step. Okay, so it could hamper your movement quite significantly, but you won't oftentimes at least affect every fighter, so they can just do something else. But it's a very, very weak crowd control, and we have a universal card that just straight up says -2 move the next activation step. That's just better. So for championship it's not good. Yeah, you could probably find use for it inside this rival deck. So yeah, but it's certainly not very good. And last of the ploys here, we must go deeper. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters, push the chosen fighters, 1 hex. After that push, each chosen fighter must be in cover hex or in enemy territory. So that push is fairly easy to complete, and if you can't complete it with 2, you can still just push 1. So in the best case scenario you get to push 2 fighters, otherwise you get to push 1. So I think it's a good card, and it will probably end up in some championship decks as well. Pushing 2 is always very strong, and some of the strongest infection cards, although those are better worded than this card, but it's still a very good complementing card, so I like this card a lot. Alright, so let's see what the upgrades bring to the table. And first up here we have Cursed Boarding Axe. Attack action, 1 range, 4 swords, 2 damage with cleave, so that's very strong profile. The bounty gain when an enemy fighter is taken out of action by this attack action is spent glory unless this fighter is on a feature token, so that's also fairly easy to set up, and I mean, getting spent glory isn't that big of a deal in a day and age where we have illusion upgrades as well. And strong searches, we most of the time we will have more glory than we spend, so it's not a big deal. And a strong attack profile, so this I like this a lot for like bigger warbands that need some weapon upgrades, so yeah, I will probably use it. Next up we have Dark Water Anchor, pretty cool card art here. I ain't moving, says Tooftagger. -1 damage to range, 3 plus attack actions that target this fighter to minimum 1. Not very strong, I mean most range 3 attacks will be 1 damage, but yeah, we have Lore Seeker and we have Storm Sires and we have like Quiet Box and whatnot. So sure, you can find use for it, but the second part is probably the better thing here. In addition, this fighter cannot be pushed by enemy warbands, so you can't push them with distractions, etc. So that's pretty strong. I'm dubious as to if I would take it in a championship deck. I mean, there were so many good cards to take, so maybe it wouldn't make the cut, but I would probably try to include it sometime, just to mix things up. I mean, as far as upgrades inside a rival deck goes, it's not horrible in any way, shape, or form. Next up we have Dredge Line, also pretty cool card art here. Hook, line, and sinker. Action: choose an enemy fighter on a feature token. Push the chosen fighter 2 hexes closer to this fighter, then break this card. I mean, pushing an enemy 2 hexes is maybe it actually is strong enough to validate breaking an upgrade and doing an action. I'm dubious though as to if I would include it, but it can be super annoying once you get good mileage out of this card. So interesting. I'm gonna leave it at that. And here is a card I really like actually, which just popped for me when I watched the cards the first time. Gallows Humor. So reaction: after an activation step in which 1 or more fighters were taken out of action, so both friendly fighters and enemy fighters, push this fighter 1 hex. So we have cards like Soundless Step that you can push after you activate a specific fighter. But this card you can push after any activation step in which 1 or more fighters dies, and you push this fighter. I mean, that can be pretty strong actually, especially if you're playing like Swarm Warband or against the Swarm Warband. You will get this push many times in game, so that can be super powerful. I mean, you don't have to do it. It's reactions, you can just choose when to do it. This I would definitely want to try. Very fun card. I will say though, as a caveat, you need to get it out pretty early to to get any decent mileage out of it, obviously. So yeah, getting it late, it won't do much for you, but I mean, if you can get it early, you can really it will really break the game, I think. So here's another strong card, I think. +1 die, Lurking Horror is called. +1 dice for this fighter's attack actions. So any attack actions. Most +1 dice is just for range 1, 2. Of this fighter's attack roll, remove 1 attack dice from that roll. Sounds like a bad thing, but if you play like my Aris, you can take away the non-success and inspire, for example. Or you can score cards like Perfect Strike or anything that requires you to have only successes. And then you also have the reaction. After your activation step, if this fighter is in a cover hex, push this fighter 1 hex. That's a situational push, but I mean, it's just a good icing on the cake for this great card, so this is a good card. It's a great card. And especially for fighters that counts as being in cover hexes all the time, that's an extremely strong push. Shadeborn or fighters upgraded with the cards that make you count as being in a cover, so yeah. Wow, this is a good card. And this is a bit more bland. Marked by the dark, this fighter's range 1 attack actions have ensnare, and snare is not very fantastic. It's okay, but it's nothing to write home about. And this fighter has the flying trait. That is obviously a good thing, but it's not really super wow. I mean, yeah, you get both effects, so but the ensnare is only for range 1, so I wouldn't take this card in the championship environment. It's probably okay, as per the Rivals deck. Next up we have an illusion. This fighter cannot be the target of an attack action unless the attacker is adjacent. So, as with the previous card, which I have forgotten the name of, this is situational, but it can be very good against some warbands, obviously. I mean, if you're playing Thunderix or Fast Riders or anything like that, it's pretty strong, but a lot of the time it won't be really that good. I mean, still most attacks will be adjacent attacks, so, but yeah, there are better illusions. Next up we have Tantalizing Map Fragment, which is keyworded as a map. If this fighter is holding an objective, this fighter can make this action. Flip an objective token this fighter is on, then gain 1 spent glory point. Give this fighter 1 charge token and break this card. So you get a charge token and you lose the upgrade. And you have to do an action to gain that spent glory. So that's just a lot of setup to get a 1 spent glory. So I think this is just a bad card, and you get a charge token as well. So you will always just use it on a pleb or like a minion, but still it's not very good, is it? Alright, so next up we have the Lifeline. At the start of the 3rd round, choose this fighter and 1 other friendly fighter. Place each fighter in the hex that was occupied by the other fighter when you chose them, then break this card. This is a pretty interesting card to save a fighter, or put another fighter up for a better attack. I mean, depending on if you take the 1st or 2nd. It's a pretty interesting card. Would I take it in a championship deck? Probably not. But it would be very interesting to see how it actually affects the game inside this rival deck. So it's a fun design. I'll give them that. If it's good, remains to be seen. Alright, so now we have Umbral Stigmata. Action: deal 1 damage to this fighter, then choose 1 enemy fighter on a feature token, deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter, then break this card. So it's very telegraphed, obviously, but maybe they can't do much about it anyway. But the enemy fighter can move away from the feature token, so yeah, they can. It's not very strong or fast ping, I guess, but yeah, it could skew the game, obviously. But I wouldn't take it in a championship game, but yeah, it could prove very decisive in some certain cases, obviously. But it's not very good card, is it? So what then is my verdict of this deck? I think it's slightly better than Patient Lurkers, but it's way worse than both Illusory Might and Vainglorious Raiders and Maze Breaches. So I think it's bottom tier for sure. You would probably have a good time with some of the cards. There are certainly strong upgrades here. I mean, the +1 dice to attack actions, any attack actions, and with the push, I think like the surge for having 2 charged fighters on feature tokens is strong as well. So there are some cards here that are good picks, definitely. I'll put up something on the screen here so you can see the strongest cards included here, so you can kind of consider them into championship decks as well. Or if you want to take like dip into this rival deck for the Rival Plus format, you can maybe have some suggestions here for cards that you could use in that format as well. So, without further ado, if you have enjoyed this type of content and this specific content, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and leave a comment. What are your thoughts? Oftentimes I get something wrong or oversee a strong card that I deemed out as being weak, so I would like to hear your comments. I don't mind that at all, actually. So, but without further ado, take care, be nice to each other, and